Hello fellow Bookworms, it's Katie. Today we're doing the spring wrap-up because it's finally June and it's been about 30 degrees Celsius for the last 1.5 months and it's undeniably summer. So let's wrap up spring. Let's be done with it. This is the wrap up for the months of March, April and May. So let's begin with some stats. I've read 17 books in total, 4 of which were audiobooks, 10 were paperback and 3 were hardback books. Combined, I listened to 59 hours and 49 minutes of audiobooks, which would be 2 days, 11 hours and 49 minutes of straight up listening. And I've read 6,595 pages of books, which makes an average of 507 pages per book. Yes, I've read a few chunky books this season. I also DNF'd 1 book. My star rating was as follows. I've had 5 1-star books, 2 2-star books, 3 3-star books, 5 4-star books and 2 5-star books, which makes an average rating of 2.8 stars. Which means I had not the best reading season, but what can you do? That's a risk you take when you read books. So let me tell you about all the books that I've read. Let's first start with a series that has an average rating of 1 star. And it is the very first series that I've read this past season. It is called the Wicked series by Deborah... Oh goddamn, I didn't write it down. And I already gave the copies back because I've borrowed them from my aunt. That is, my aunt gave them to me for me to read, and I did finally after 2 years. And I did not enjoy the series at all. It's about these witches and they are in a war with the, not really wizards, but they are also witches, but like male witches, and there are these 2 families fighting each other and it's so cheesy and campy and it is this early 2000s we will cram everything ever pop culturally related to magic into this story, and there's like a goddess, a moon goddess, and like a wicked Satan-like god that the male witches are praying to, and it's just really bad and cheesy, and the characters are hilariously bad and plots are so all over the place. I do not recommend reading these books. I just read them because I had them and I wanted to give them back to my aunt, and it was so bad, but I had a ton of fun with it because it was so bad that it's good, but I would not recommend it. Okay, next on the list with an average rating of 1.3 stars, I have a German book series. It is called the Seiten der Welt series. This is marked as an YA series. It is by Meyer, a German author of whom I have read several books before this series. And I have to say that I just cannot get along with his writing. And I personally think he's not a very good writer. The characters are all over the place, the plot lines are all over the place. It's always tell-over show. This is some kind of fantasy world, like a parallel fantasy world to our own. And it's just not set up properly, so every solution that he has is kind of like pulled out of thin air, and it's really, really, really bad. This series was a best-selling series here in Germany, and I do not understand how that could happen. I think these books have been translated into Czech and maybe Italian, but I do not recommend you guys to check them out. They're really, really, really bad. There's bookish powers and stuff like that, like book magic, and that's like a really cool concept. But then the author goes so far as to, in the last book, write himself into the story. How he meets one of the main protagonists basically comes to him. He is basically the god of this world, and the main protagonist has to argue with him and has to convince him not to destroy the world that he built and destroy the world that a character lives in. The author wrote himself into his story as a god. What the fuck? And then it gets even worse. I just have to go on a little rant, okay, about a book that you will never read. But this was so frustrating. Especially in this book, there's a there's racism. There's just it's there. There's this dark-skinned race of fantasy beings, basically, and they are described so as the reader can draw a parallel. It's pretty blatant to African cultures, but not, you know, in a neutral way, in a way that is through the lens of colonization, and that is always, you know, tinted with racism. The Tintlinger, the dark-skinned race in this book, is described as being stupid, ugly, disfigured. They are described to have an animal stench to them. Yes, I don't make this up. This is in the book. They are described as mimicking the white protagonists. They are described as illiterate. Their language is described as harsh and nonsensical. They are described as worshipping one of the white protagonists and basically seeing her as their goddess. And while there is this apocalyptic event going on in their world, they are worshipping her and praying to her through you know, drum beats and dances. They adorn themselves with wooden beads and necklaces made out of bones and feathers, and they are described as living in little huts, and that their town that they live in, or their little culture that they live in, is made up of tribes. It's just very clear that the author drew his inspiration from, you know, African cultures, but looked at them through a very disgusting, racist view. And it's so blatantly clear. And my favorite part is actually when the main protagonist comes to save these people, and the ship that she saves them with is called Blanche, which means white in French. I hate this book. I still am so angry with the racism in this book, and I cannot understand how this got printed, how editors, you know, read this and thought, yes, we can put this out into the world, we can put this in a young adult book. It's just so fucking disgusting. And I didn't even mention that the author cannot form a sentence, you know, a grammatically correct sentence for shit, and he cannot do interpunctation if his life depended on it. And the only reason why I didn't give this series just flat out 1 star is that the first book, where there's, you know, this dark-skinned race isn't even heard of in this book, is kind of okay. It is not good, but it's kind of okay. But this book, the third book, is just full of racism and full of shit, and I hate it with the fire of 1,000 suns. I wrote a Goodreads review, but it's very low, unlike all the reviews, and I'll link it down below. If you want to support me in spreading the word that this book contains racism and is not okay, then maybe out of the goodness of your heart, even if you can't read German or understand German, you can go to the review and maybe give it a like so it shows up, you know, further up the reviews. That would be great. I just fucking hate this book. Okay. Okay, that's it for my mini rant. Coming out of that little rant, let's move on to a 2-star book. I've read Fire by Kristin Cashore. This is a book of the Graceling realm. I would say it's a prequel to Graceling. I wouldn't recommend reading it in general, but you can read it on its own. So this is about Fire. She is a monster, and in this land there are monsters, and they have this power over humans and lure them to their death, or want to lure them to their death, and she has some kind of mental powers. She grew up in this pretty reclusive northern estate, but now there's a war looming, so she goes south to King's City, the main capital of this land, to support the king in his spying action so he can win his war. And also there's romance. I'm going to film a full-on review on this book tomorrow, but just so far I did not like this book very much. That is, I enjoyed this book reading, but I don't think it's a very good book. I cannot sit here, like, I had fun with it. It's despite it being 400 and odd pages, I read it in 3 days. It's a super quick read. It's fantasy light, I would say. Like, you don't really need to think anything. The characters say everything for you out loud. You don't really have to think about their motivations. They spell it out for you. And it's a super quick read, but it's not good. Like, the quality of it is just not very good. The beginning was pretty interesting plot-wise, but then it just, I mean, you know how it's going to end and you know what's going to happen, but you kind of have to go through the motions, and the book just drags on and on and on and on, and you just sit there like, come on, please, I want to finish this book. That's it for this book. Moving on. Here's another fantasy series that I've read this 3 months. It is the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch, starting with The Lies of Locke, Lamora, and then Red Seas Under Red Skies, and the last book that is out as of today, The Republic of Thieves. So, star rating wise, I gave the first book 4 stars and the other books 2 stars. And no, not 2 stars, 3 stars. And I'm also going to film a review on the entire series. In the first book, we meet Locke and his group of thieves that is called the Gentleman Bastards, and they have been together for their entire life. They have been trained by this dude to be excellent thieves and con artists. So Locke and his little group of friends, they are, you know, having this big game on robbing this rich noble dude, and when the Grey King that has entered their home city of Cashore basically fucks shit up for them, and then they are in danger and, you know, have to get out of there, and you know. So, you know, I just don't want to tell you more because it would be spoilers. I really enjoy the first book, The Gentleman Bastards. You really can see how, or you can really feel that they have been growing up together. You can feel their family bonds, and the world is my favorite aspect in this book. It's so much fun. It's so rich and detailed. The character motivations in the first book make total sense. The villain is great. He has very similar motivation to Locke, and when they finally meet and have to oppose each other, it's almost poetic. And just writing is so good, especially in the first book. The structure of the plot, the rhythm of the sentences and the word choice, it's just really good. The second and third book, I did have problems with the plot in the second book, and it was just so convoluted and messy, and it was so boring, it almost catapulted me into a reading slump. It took ages for me to get through this book. And also, I just do not enjoy pirate books or books set on ships because 1, I just don't like boats because I get seasick, and 2, the all things nautical, like the long descriptions of all things nautical, just got so boring. And then we have the third book, and this is some kind of political intrigue, or it's supposed to be, but it very quickly gets overshadowed by this stupid-ass romance. And we finally meet Sabitha, who has been set up throughout the first 2 books, and I was so excited to meet her, and then when we finally do, it's such a letdown, because she started so strong in the beginning of this book, but then, you know, in the middle of it, it just all falls apart. And I think it's a problem of fantasy literature in general, and that is this kind of incel bullshit mindset. So Locke, the main protagonist, basically insta falls super hard for Sabitha. He really falls in love with her when he's like 6 years old, and it's, oh, there's a fly in my room. How did you get in here? Hello, can you please leave? But she is having none of his bullshit. She does not want to be with him. But he is so obsessed with her, and, you know, he's under the impression that he just has to hold on to her and has to be nice to her, and then she will reward his ordeal with her attention and love and sex. And I just hate it. I hated it. And Sabitha pretty much tells him outright, like, hey, dude, I don't owe you anything. I don't want to be with you. And then, I guess, because the author had to force these two together, we sacrifice everything of Sabitha's character, we take a 180 degrees turn, and they are just together, and it makes no sense at all. It ruined the entire book for me because it's just not authentic to her character, and I wish we would have gone another road. I wish we would have gone the road that Locke had to learn to accept her wishes, to accept her, statement, to accept that she doesn't love him, and to move on, which would be the healthy way to do. But no, that's not what we did. We just, blah. I was very disappointed. I still liked it, but because the first half was pretty good, but then the second half is like, bleh. No, I don't want this incel bullshit in my fantasy literature. I hate the sentiment, the sentiment of guys that women owe something to them, that women owe them love and attention and sex because they have been in love with one woman and have been obsessed with her and have been nice to her, and it's just this toxic mindset, and I hate it. And I think that's a trope that is spread throughout fantasy literature, especially written by male authors. Another example would be Denna from the Kindkiller Chronicles. Ugh. Oh, I hate it so much. With an average rating of 4 stars, we have the Dreamer's Pool trilogy. I have already made a review video of this series, so if you want to know my thoughts more in detail, you can go check that out. This is a fantasy series about Blackthorn, who is a middle-aged healer person. It's set in a medievalish kind of fairy tale-y version of Ireland, and Grim, her companion, they are both, in the first book, Dreamer's Pool, they've both been imprisoned by this very evil chieftain. In Blackthorn's case, it was because she confronted this person who is very violent towards women, commits various crimes towards women, and she has been standing up in front of him for these women and demanding justice for them, but he threw her in prison. And then she gets an offer from this Fey man that he will free her, but she has to serve 7 years as a healer in this little village far away, and she cannot pursue her plan of getting justice for the women and getting justice for herself from this Mathwin person, from this evil dude. And then we have our little mystery books, because these are medieval mysteries basically. So I have to say, I really enjoyed them. Dreamer's Pool, Tower of Thorns and Den of Wolves. Even though the pacing is super slow and the mysteries are pretty weak, I could see the solution of these mysteries coming from about a mile away all of the time. But it really is more character driven. I really enjoyed that these were more feminist kind of fantasy books, and that women were still were treated unfairly, but that there were women standing up for each other and demanding justice for women. I really enjoyed the take on trauma, because Grim as well as Blackthorn are dealing with immense trauma, and I really enjoyed that Juliet Marillier did her research, and that we get different looks on trauma and how people deal with it, and how much time it takes to deal with it, how much time it takes to actually form a bond with another person and trust another person again. I really enjoy that, and it's definitely a character-driven story, and I would definitely recommend it if you are looking for some fantasy books to read. So the next 2 books that I've read were The Prisoner of Azkaban and The Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling, the 2 Harry Potter books. I listened to them on audiobook and I gave them both 4 stars. I'm revisiting the Harry Potter series at the moment. That is, I'm listening to them the first time in English. I've only ever read or listened to the Harry Potter series in German. It's almost like I'm reading it for the first time in some way, because some things were just translated very differently into German. They were translated that it makes sense in German. Some wordplays just don't make sense in German, or just not that funny in German. So I'm discovering a lot of new things. In the 5th book that I'm currently listening to, Grimmauld Place, Like in German, the joke's just not there, you know, grim old place. It just doesn't make, it doesn't translate that well to German. And then moving on to the last two books, were the last two books in the Lockwood & Co series, which I also listened to an audiobook. And we have the fourth book, that is The Creeping Shadow, and then the fifth book, that is The Empty Grave, and I gave the fourth book 4 stars and the fifth book 5 stars. I really enjoyed them. I like that Lucy gets a lot of, you know, character development, and that she finally learns to stand up for herself, and that she learns to stand up to Lockwood when he has his, you know, little antics going on, and she's like, Lockwood, no, this is BS. Like, we need to do something else. I really enjoyed the series overall. I'm also doing a full series review later, I think maybe next week, and I definitely enjoyed the conclusion to the overarching plot. It was pretty satisfying, and although I did kind of see it coming, it's a pretty nice series. You know, it's a pretty nice YA series for, you know, the youngest. It's maybe more on the younger spectrum of YA. Maybe I just tell you about the one book that I DNF'd real quick. It is this book. It's the Down the Long Wind series by Gillian Bradshaw. It's a book from the 80s, and I've started the first book in German. It's been translated. Hog of May is the title in English. And yeah, I've read 100 pages. I've read about a third of, you know, the book, and it just wasn't gripping me. It was very, like, it didn't age well. It's a very 80s fantasy with a lot of Christian symbolism, and no, it didn't grab my attention. It was pretty boring, and I knew that I would, you know, have to force myself to read it, and I borrowed these books from my dad's girlfriend, and I'll just give them back, and I just didn't enjoy it, so I'm not going to force myself to read this. So let me just tell you real quick about what I'm currently reading, so you kind of have an idea what to expect in the future. I'm currently reading the Darker Shades of Magic series. I've started with the first book, A Darker Shade of Magic by Viguié Schwab. Yeah, and I've read about a third. I'm at page 137. I enjoy-ish it so far. It's fine. I'm intrigued with the world building, but I have to say, right as of now, Lila Bard is getting on my fucking nerves. The little girl has to just get over herself. Just get over yourself, Lila. You're not the special flower as you think you are. Yes. Yeah, we'll see where this is going. So far, I have yet to be wooed over by this book. Then I'm reading a short story collection that is called Tangleweed and Brine by Deirdre Sullivan. These are kind of fairy tale reimaginations. Yeah, let's call it that. I'm not getting on too great with this book, to be honest. I've read about 5 or 6 stories, and I've really just liked one of them. All the other stories were just okay. And I think that is because of the writing style, because a lot of it is told in second-person narrative, and second-person narrative requires the reader to strongly identify with the protagonist of the story, and that is just not the case for me, and so I just can't connect with the stories in any way, shape or form. Okay, moving on. I'm also slowly trudging through The Silk Roads, A New History of the World by Peter Frankopan, which I started for Nonfiction November last November, and I've yet to finish it. I'm about a little bit under halfway through. It's not that it is super uninteresting, it's just that I'm not always in the mood for some history, and it's just very, very long and very detailed history, and I'm not always in the mood for it, but I will finish it eventually. So there we go. So that's it for today. This is going to be a pretty long video, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you're reading something magical and wonderful, and I will see you soon. Bye!